Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I just thought I'd chop it up that way, just change things up. Good morning. It is January 26, 2017. Your president is an insane, racist baby, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, there's remedies, but nobody's going to use them. So how's it going to go for the next 4 years? I don't know. We'll see. I'm increasingly, ordinarily the phrase is I'm increasingly concerned, but I don't know if I'm concerned or not. But I'm increasingly convinced the president looks terrible physically. I think he's going to die in office. Good morning. How you doing, everybody? I think he's not well. I think his mental state is deteriorating. I think his physical state is deteriorating. But I'm not a doctor. We'll leave that to I don't know who, because he hasn't really got a doctor. He's just got the guy in New York that gives him one-liners about his state of his health. And hey, if he dies, he dies. What are you going to do? But things continue to spiral out of control. I don't even really know where to start with today's crazy. I guess the most discussed stuff is the interview with ABC that he gave yesterday, or that aired yesterday, and in which he just went on insanely about how everything, all the crazy stuff. My inauguration crowd was the largest ever. I got a huge standing ovation at the CIA, and there were no Trump people there. They were all CIA people, and it was the longest standing ovation since Peyton Manning won the Super Bowl, which who even knows what that's supposed to mean? Surely Peyton Manning didn't go to the CIA. Did I miss that? He was invited to the White House, I assume, after the Super Bowl. Did he get a standing ovation? He may have. By the way, I also saw reported, it's a couple of days ago after the CIA visit. Were there no chairs at the CIA event? Is that why he thought he got a standing ovation? I think that actually ended up being the case. Anyway, the various departments of the government continue to resist via Twitter, apparently. Individual rogue elements of the agencies insist on starting their own Twitter accounts in an attempt to keep some sort of grounding in reality. And I don't know whether it's working or not. I guess so. I mean, it works for you and me. We'll see whether it works for, those people. Also, plenty of things to catch up on. There's little details. There's overarching narratives. There's inside baseball. There's all kinds of things. And Greg says, it says got one. Got one what? What am I going to look at this feed coming through? 19 messages, by the way. A busy and active day already for Greg. Got one. Oh, okay. Oh, it's a Storify. Look out. Of the U.S. National Park Service. Okay, so they're still at it as well. And I understand even upcoming, another march being organized for or by the scientific community specifically in an effort to remind everybody that there are in fact truths out there, scientific evidence that can't be erased no matter what Donald Trump attempts to do as unitary chief executive of the United States. They've been spurred to action. I also understand there were some murmurings about an April, like a tax day march to insist on the release of his tax information, which, depending on what minute you interview Kellyanne Conway, either is coming or isn't coming. I also note this morning that Kellyanne Conway was on TV, I guess, with NBC. This is sort of a troubling thing. This is kind of where we are that makes it difficult. I just retweeted this moments before coming on the air. It is John Swain. Let me bring Greg in here. Greg, you probably just saw this thing too. John Swain's tweet, a senior reporter for The Guardian, U.S., and reporting on NBC, or commenting on NBC News' tweet. The NBC News tweet reads, Kellyanne Conway claims Tiffany Trump says This is where we are in America. Kellyanne Conway claims Tiffany Trump says it's flatly false. She's registered to vote in 2 states. You'll recall that part of the wacko unhinged interview with ABC News was Donald Trump insisting that one of the signs of voter fraud that he would be investigating was that he had heard that there were millions of Americans registered to vote sometimes in 2 states, and he's convinced that when you're registered in 2 states, 'cause there are millions of Americans probably registered in 2 states.
Sure, people move.
Right. We talked with Joan yesterday. She mentioned, when I moved from Seattle back to Idaho, I didn't call the Board of Elections back in Seattle and say, hey, I moved, you need to take me off the rolls. Nobody does that. We probably should. I mean, that would be the responsible thing to do, but you're not required to do that. Although, again, maybe we should start doing that because we also complain about voter roll purging all the time. And, I mean, what are these voting boards supposed to do? Knowing that people move, they have to, at some point, get people off the list. Anyway, Tiffany Trump, apparently among the many people involved with this White House who are registered in 2 states. I saw yesterday Steve Bannon is registered in 2 states. I would venture to guess he's registered in a third, California. But he's registered in New York and Florida. And I think he's registered in 2 places in Florida, and they didn't include that. Tiffany Trump, who up until recently was a student at the University of Pennsylvania, registered both at home and in Pennsylvania, but I'm sure voting only once, and that there were a number of people connected with the White House who are registered twice. But Kellyanne Conway says that Tiffany says that that's false. Doubly troubling is that's what NBC News tweeted, and Swain, he notes it this way. He says, but it's not flatly false. It's absolutely true. Why would you tweet that? And in fact, if you go and you read the NBC News report to which their tweet links, the headline is Tiffany Trump on voter rolls in 2 states despite claims otherwise by Kellyanne Conway. Why isn't that the tweet?
You know, it's just so weird. I have to start out with this just because for my own sanity and yours, okay, because this is where we're going.
Yeah.
Democrats launched scorched earth strategy against Trump. This is from Politico this morning. They were entitled to a grace period, and they blew it, said one governor. That was Jay Inslee. It's been worse than I could have imagined the first few days. So it's not like we're just throwing up our hands and saying there's nothing we can do about it. There's a lot we can. There's a lot that's going to happen anyway despite that. But, you know, it's like the banner that I guess Greenpeace unfurled yesterday next to the White House. They have all these White House cameras set up to always, you know, have a picture of the White House because reporters stand in front of it and they give their feeds. And the cameras were all moved from the White House to a crane near the White House because a giant resist banner came down. And that was the feed, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
And it was symbolic, not just because resist, but also because Trump wants all the attention. And guess what? We moved the cameras. Too bad for you, Donald.
That's pretty funny. And that's the way to get under his skin. We got to talk about that, and we'll do an extensive review, I think, of that article, because I know there's also people out there who have read a little bit about it, and it's funny. That should be, you'd think from the headline, like, oh, well, this is going to be great. But in fact, there's plenty in the article that suggests that there's significant disagreement about what the strategy is going to be.
Well, they haven't gotten to the end yet. It's just the article is saying that, you know, they're moving toward that direction, and they note that, I'll leave it for you to analyze, but they note that the base really wants this.
Yes. That's true. But it is, I'll say this, it's a Politico article. And, you know, if you're reading it hoping to hear about that, the scorched earth policy and all Dems signing up for it, they'll want to give you a little bit of.
I don't expect that we're Democrats, but, you know, it's better than where we could have been.
Yeah. Well, we'll take it apart.
It's better than a Democrats in disarray piece, which they could write any time because they just feel like it.
I'm surprised they didn't do that.
They will. I have faith, you know, but that's that. I also have this is a 57 tweet storm, which I am not going to read to you. Thank you very much. You're welcome. But I just wanted to give you an idea of the flavor of it. It's from Alexandra Aaron on making same-side internet interactions and disagreements work better. And I thought it was just useful to go over the first 3 or 4.
Same side, okay.
One more thread on resistance and unity in fighting. What to do when you have a difference in opinion about how someone is proceeding. Number one is check your relative positions. I don't mean privilege. I mean, who are you to them? Anybody? I see people who are, relatively speaking, total randos correcting other people like they're a trusted mentor with valuable advice. Let's say you're completely right, and they're completely wrong. And the mistake will doom us all if left unchecked. Let's just say that. You still have to convince them your sure and certain knowledge that you're right doesn't translate into actual authority. And honestly, it's probably less important that you convince this one person, this one thing that you think. And they gave an example of, on the right, what happens is, what's his name, Milo Yiannopoulos?
Yes. Okay.
Maybe you know who he is, maybe you don't, she says. The people who do won't believe this, but there's a lot of people out there who have no clue as to who he is.
I know who he is. I have no clue why he's that.
Right. So he comes or his name comes up. He's a huge figurehead of the alt-right and white nationalists. He's deeply intertwined with Gamergate. He's part of the Trump Internet troll army. And she says every time there's a thread about him on the Gamergate subreddit, there's at least one person who says, who's this guy?
Yeah.
And so, he's really totally famous. Everybody knows, except there are people that don't know.
Yeah, in that group who
and
like that stuff.
Off that group, there's probably even more people that don't know, and that's really the message.
That's where we are.
So, you can't just come in and say, oh, this, and this, because, who are you, and how does that help communicate, even if you're right? So a lot of the fights I see on Twitter are about that. Or the fights, that you could see online between, I feel this way and you feel that way, and somebody who you never saw before comes into your Twitter feed and instructs you on how you should think. And how does that go over? It's not going to go over well because you don't know who they are and you don't know where they're coming from, and you got to establish that first before you can have an actual dialogue about, okay, what are you trying to say? Whereas the same thing coming from somebody you do know is going to get instant gravitas. Right?
Yeah.
So, just be careful. So now you have all these different groups arguing about what to do, and it's very difficult for us, who they don't know, to tell them, look, we already see where this is going. And that's a problem in and of itself. Some of us look and see where the situation is now. And I hope I could get him on the air by mentioning his name, he who must not be named, but Armando's really good at this.
Oh my God. Okay, yes.
Oh my God.
What are you trying to do?
Maybe it'll happen. Who knows? Here's step 1, and here's step 2, and this is leading us to step 3, and Armando says, yes, step 10, this is what you have to do.
Right.
And he's right, okay? And then so we step back and look and say, we know Armando. We accept step 10. Good point. Let's think about it. Yeah, step 10. And other people look and say, wait a minute, I'm still at step 3.
Right.
And then I got to go to step 4. And Armando will say, but step 10.
Yes.
Yeah, but step 5 and step 6 and Armando will say, step 10. How many times do I have to tell you step 10? I'm not even talking to you anymore.
Yeah, that does happen. I get involved in things like that from both sides. I think I probably do that to a lot of people.
I'm simply saying it's sometimes nice to step back and look at that process and say, this is what's happening. Let me try to, let's finish step 3, step 4, step 5 and see where it gets. Yep. Maybe it'll be step 10 and then everybody will be on the same page and we don't have to fight about it.
Okay.
That's all.
Let's do that.
Okay. So when you see about Democrats trying to get to the position of what are we going to do, that's a lot of it. Yeah. Some people get there fast, some people get there slow, but if this is really what you have to do, if this is what the need is, well, I'll get there. So I'm not worried about the fact that even in Politico, the story doesn't match the headline. It will, just not yet.
Well, we hope so. Yeah, this is it's a rather enormous problem. That's one of the shortcomings of Twitter.
Yeah.
But, if you're reminded every once in a while to keep that in mind, you can get past it. You can even overcome the close relative of why does this surprise you, Twitter?
Yes, exactly.
It's like, it doesn't. I'm just talking. Okay.
That is funny, and you're absolutely right. So, it's just a question of you have more fun with it if you just keep that in mind.
Okay.
All right, so let's get back to the headlines here. We have this problem.
I know we have it. Oh,
we
sorry.
do. In Trump's unfounded voter fraud claim, a familiar pattern, Matt Visor over at the Boston Globe is talking about all the different ways that Donald Trump lies. And you brought up probably the most important one, at least from yesterday, which was the ABC interview. I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Okay.
But from the day before,
Oh.
at the very end of yesterday's my part on the show, I didn't bring it up, but I Skyped over to you, so I repeated it this morning. This is Brad Jeffy talking about another bizarre thing.
Yes, okay.
The kind of email you'd usually see from a campaign where the White House press office, the usually staid and sober press office, is tweeting out, here's how wonderful we are, campaign releases, praise for President Trump's bold action, all this stuff, like a campaign committee would do.
Right.
Which is really odd, but part and parcel of the whole thing. So he has this interview, and in the interview he says a bunch of weird stuff, some of which we'll get to, because there's so much weird stuff he can't get to it all, and that's why, as you pointed out in the interview, in the introduction, why the overarching narrative is so important. The overarching narrative is that he's incompetent and, mentally not there.
Yeah.
And so when he says crazy stuff, it's this one, that one, as 17 others, but the overarching narrative puts it in perspective, and if you don't name them all, you still haven't missed anything if you pick up just a few. So Glenn Kessler, who is the fact checker
yeah.
at the Washington Post, listens to this interview, and I think he starts drinking.
Yeah,
because,
wow.
what else would you do, right?
Well,
he tweets, this interview is so filled with inaccurate and misleading statements by Trump, I don't even know where to begin. But he does it anyway.
Okay, good. At least
right?
he starts.
Maggie Haberman over at the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
Trump has reverted completely to the primary in this interview and in his anger at his coverage. Karen Tumulty at the Washington Post. In his first major TV interview as president, Trump is endlessly obsessed about his popularity.
Yes.
So the reporters are seeing this.
Good.
Looking at this guy. He's on TV. He's not all there, completely focused on himself, and they see it.
I am glad.
Next question on the table is what they're going to do about it, but step by step by step, at least see it. And if everybody agrees that that's what they're seeing, it becomes easier to plot out the step by step how you're going to get there. Because some of these reporters, they're not like Armando. They can't jump to step 10 and say, obviously, the guy's crazy. They have to get there step by step by step.
Yes. I do. I see that, the temptation to then tweet them, well, why do you cover them, or why do you go to the press briefings?
Or even worse, why did you say he had Sean Spicer had a good 5 minutes there for everything back to normal?
And that too. And I realized just the other day when he had his third appearance, and I was like, why are you still there? But
But then, you could look at it and say, look, Armando would look at it and say, guys, why are you believing Spicer? He's a liar, and he's going to be a liar in a week. And the reporters are going, well, he was lying, and then he was lying, but he had this good day. Let them get to step 4, but he's lying again.
Yeah.
If you let them do that, they'll get to where Armando is. Armando, I'm using you metaphorically, but,
Right. Because we don't know where he is.
Yeah, but come on the show and tell me I'm wrong. Go ahead.
Okay. You're wrong.
Yeah, I know. I like it when it comes.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we have this. Let's go back to the interview.
All right.
So David Muir asks him a bunch of questions, and as you point out, he says all the things he said, like the Peyton Manning thing that has nothing to do with anything and makes everybody scratch their head. Here's one little piece of it. You can't read the whole thing, or at least I can't. You can. You have the whole show. But listen to this. David Muir says, I want to ask you about something you said this week right here at the White House. You brought in congressional leaders to the White House. You spoke at length about the presidential election with them, telling them you lost the popular vote because of millions of illegal votes. 3 to 5 million illegal votes. That would be the biggest electoral fraud in American history. Where's the evidence of that? And Trump says, let me tell you, first of all, it was so misrepresented. That was supposed to be a confidential meeting.
Oh, yeah.
right? He's already upset because people are starting to leak, and we'll get to all the tweets from the National Park Service, et cetera. And you weren't supposed to go out and talk to the press but the Democrats viewed it as not a confidential meeting. And David Muir said, but you tweeted about the millions of illegals. And Trump said, yeah. And I mean it, but it was supposed to be confidential. They turned it into not confidential. And number two, the conversation lasted for about a minute. They made it like it was like 25%. It wasn't. It was hardly even discussed. So in other words, yeah, I said it. They weren't supposed to tell you, and they did. And so now they're making it into a big deal, and I'm blaming them because what I said was incredibly crazy, but it's their fault. Because it's never my fault.
Astonishing, the whole thing. The first level, yes, none of this is my fault. Then, of course, well, you tweeted it. Yeah, but what I told them was supposed to be secret. But you actually in public said the exact same thing. So
you said it first.
Yeah. How do you know that what they said is what people are? All right. There's that. There's the second level, I think, which is interesting because I recall that the defenders of the use of the leaked and or hacked DNC emails and other emails very frequently fell back on it. Yeah, I know that wasn't supposed to be public, but it's true and it was said, and it's important that people, they said that this is a public service revealing what gets said behind closed doors. And he rah-rahed that, and then obviously it was only a matter of weeks before people were doing that to him, and he's apoplectic about it. That, okay, so fine. He's also the same hypocrite you knew he was before I began saying anything. Terrific.
Right. But, here he is on TV where everybody can see it, so it is a little odd. And then he still fights with him. I mean, there's another 3 or 4 minutes of him fighting with this.
Yeah.
And then he says, we're going to find out. It could be more. It could be that much. We don't know. We're going to find out. Mm-hmm. And it occurs to me that, remember the example that I was using with a theoretical Armando?
Like a minute ago? Yeah.
Yeah. Where Armando is intuitive enough so that he can hear step 1, step 2, and then immediately get to step 10.
Yes, okay.
And be right about what's going on.
Right.
And then you get a little frustrated with people who still need to go step 2, step 3, step 4. Okay?
Okay.
Trump's speaking style.
Yes.
Trump's ability to communicate with his supporters is a variation of that, and a weird one. Okay? You take 10 steps to present a situation and then get to the point where you say, okay, so here's the solution.
All right.
Trump is only step 1, step 10.
Oh, yes. Okay.
He skips steps 2 through 9 as if they don't matter. And his supporters here's the problem, here's the solution, skipping the process, skipping the difficulty. And they hear, he's talking to me. He says illegal immigration is a problem. He's got a wall to fix it. He skipped all the steps in the middle. But it speaks to me. I know what he's saying.
I get you.
They hear that.
Yeah.
And then later, even if it turns out that they can't get exactly what he promised, they don't care because he heard me. Mm-hmm. I didn't care about all those other steps. I don't want to hear you tell me about how Congress does this and that and can't get it done in committee and this and that and it didn't work because, recess, which is not really the recess, it's really something. I just want to know, did they pass it or not? That's what voters are saying. And so they're very happy with him when he skips step 2 through 9. The problem with that is you can't function that way. That's not how it works. That's not how the process works, and that's not how governance works. And it's even dangerous. Yeah. Because then he says, okay, I recognize a problem in step 1. I have a solution in step 10. You guys aren't implementing it. Don't bother me, the president, with steps 2 through 9. They're too complicated anyway. I'm going to force it.
Yeah.
I'm going to skip the process. And for those of you, and I said this to you on the show the other day, for those of you who understand the process and why it is what it is and why the safeguards and stuff like that are all in there, you're just ripping that out and saying none of that's important. And it is important. It's worth preserving. There's a reason why some of that stuff is there, and you have to replace it with something else. You can't just get rid of it. And Trump is saying, yeah, I can. And his supporters love that. They're not interested in the process.
Hey.
That's my overarching narrative. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I don't know.
Is it right?
President. It feels that way to me.
It feels that way to me too. So I think when I'm looking at the whole situation, I'm saying no wonder he is able to connect with so many people. He's skipping all the complicated stuff and saying, you don't have to worry about the complicated stuff. I'll do that. Except he doesn't know how to do it either.
Yeah.
And then he turns to Paul Ryan and says, you do all the complicated stuff. Come back to me with the solution.
Yeah, and if he can't get it done exactly the way he described it in his fantasy, then he yells at Ryan. Us. Yeah, right. And I guess it does.
And it's Ryan's fault. It's not my fault.
Right.
I told you what I was going to do. He's the guy that screwed up.
Right. Well,
can you see that pattern? I just see that pattern happening.
I can see it, and it's familiar enough, certainly, and it takes a slightly different form, but it exists everywhere.
Yes.
Certainly, like for instance, well, just to draw a parallel right now on the Democratic side, going back to what will come out of that Politico article, the basic gist of what they're trying to do, I think, in that article is illustrate that there's a divide, because Dems divided, between Democrats, elected Democrats who say, okay, how are we going to go about maximizing our resistance to the Trump agenda? And rank and file Democrats who say, I'll show you how you resist the Trump agenda. You say no to everything at every turn and use the scorched earth strategy. And then on the other hand, like we've been discussing, well, okay, but elected Democrats are, for instance, opting to let certain nominees go by without putting up the fight of a no vote at certain stages of the process. However, the process isn't moving any faster than it could move if they were fighting tooth and nail at every step. So if the goal is, well, we're going to slow down the process as much as possible and leave as little floor time as possible for them to actually accomplish any of their agenda, they've so far been right on the mark. If the agenda is, well, we're also going to cast a bunch of no votes, that doesn't eat any more. It doesn't take any longer to vote no than it does to vote yes. And
the votes, the end result's going to be the same.
Yeah, that's another thing. They are going to get approved. And I understand the frustration with, well, what do you think what kind of cookie do you think you're going to get for voting yes on somebody who's incompetent and named to their position by an incompetent? But the two different kinds of fights.
Right. And it gets even a little more subtle than that. And let me give you an example. Okay. And that's why it works for Trump voters, because they don't really care if they get it done or not. They just want to be happy or sad, and it's like nothing in the middle. But if you really want to get stuff accomplished, the process matters. And here's a couple of, or at least one example of, if not more than one, of where that comes up. Let's say Paul Ryan wants to get rid of Medicare.
Let's say that.
Let's say Trump doesn't.
All right.
Which one do you support? There will be times that Democrats are going to say, I'm with Trump on this one, because the alternative, which is Ryan's version, is worse. Mm-hmm. Is that backing off of the scorched earth policy where you're supposed to say no to everything? Well, it's a little more subtle than that. Here's another example, just a theoretical example, because it's not going to come up. Let's say James Comey was subject to Senate review before he is confirmed or kept. Let's say he had a sunset and you have to reappoint him and the Senate has to say yes for the sake of argument. Okay. And we've had this discussion in a different context. What do you do? Because if you say no, then it's going to be Rudy Giuliani.
Right.
So what do you do? I mean, you're supposed to say no to everything, but here's one where maybe I won't. Yeah, but Comey. Yeah, but Giuliani.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of governance, right? I mean, these actual difficult decisions come up for everybody.
Yeah. That's certainly true. And of course, there's also, electoral politics and those considerations at play.
Well, you're adding in all this real life stuff, steps 2 through 9.
Yes, that's where I meant to get to. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, I mean, this is the most recent example, but we've been through this a number of times at Daily Kos and when undertaking various strategies and having to explain to people, particularly when you're in the minority and on the you're the out party in the White House. So during the Bush years, we saw an awful lot of, why don't Dems just XYZ? Or even when we were in, why don't they just, like with the public option, why doesn't somebody just offer an amendment saying we're going to have a public option? Well, will it have the votes to carry on the floor? How do you get it there? Under what procedure do you bring it? What's in it? What about people who say they wanted a more liberal public option than that? And are they going to opt for it, or are they going to vote for a different amendment? Will they come around if their amendment loses? What order are the amendments going to be offered in so that we can tell whether it's time to abandon the ideal position and fall back to a slightly less optimal one? Yeah, all of those things. The answer to why don't they just is steps 2 through 9. We are subject to the same problems.
Yeah, except Trump wants to rip all of that out and say none of that matters because I have my own way. Too bad for you if you don't like it.
Yeah, we end up getting frustrated like, damn, I wish I understood the process better. And he just bulldozes through things and says, who cares?
Exactly. And so it's asymmetric warfare, and that's one of the reasons why the whole thing seems so frustrating to us and so pleasing to his supporters, even though the end result is chaos.
Yeah.
And the complete ripping out of what you might consider to be a theme, fair play, justice, rule of law, that we consider to be important and worth defending. That's where I was going the other day with those kind of comments. And it is frustrating. So he does this, and then he starts putting out gag orders on a lot of the different cabinet and department people, telling the EPA they're not allowed to get new grants, if people get their water poisoned, not just Flint, but going forward, too bad for you. And he tells the National Park Service you can't tweet, and he tells this and that and everything else. And so the people who are actually working in government and are former employees, a lot of this stuff is coming from former employees, start putting together these resistance Twitter accounts. And one of the more famous ones is the U.S. National Park Service. So I have a very brief tweet storm from them they put together. Good morning, America. We have a few important things to say this morning, nothing to worry about, though. Science matters, resist are the hashtags. A march on Washington is being nationally organized to advocate the importance of science to Trump. And takes a climatecentral.org piece, scientists are planning the next big Washington march. Mm-hmm. We cannot confirm which species has the smallest hands. New specimens are being found daily by scientists around the world. Mm-hmm. We've decided to pass over control of this account to individuals outside of government employment for the sake of our colleagues. The past few days have proven the immense belief and support this country has in our national parks, the environment, and scientific departments. But we cannot escape the pressure that the popularity of this account has brought to our colleagues, for comments like that other one with the hands. It's selfish to continue ourselves. They haven't won, and we haven't lost. And you have proven that this country believes in the serious work undertaken by our scientists. As such, we are handing control of this account over to several activists and journalists who believe they can continue in the same spirit. We'd like to thank the anonymous members of the Reddit community who helped us get the ball rolling and assist with a safe transfer of control. The individuals taking over come from various countries, but all have a science background and are fearful about a Trump administration. It's too early to expose ourselves and enjoy the 30 minutes of applause before the eventual repercussions. We haven't slept much this week, but we are assured and comforted that those taking over will not identify us to the media. We ask to remain unknown. They have promised to all our colleagues. We've heard the jokes going round. You'll never know, but we're glad to have brought some laughter at this time. Climate change is real. Trump, you got to deal with it now or have the problems it creates be your legacy for now and future generations. You have the power, the authority, and the resources to make the best of our country and this world. Don't squander it. Ends with a quote by Isaac Asimov. The saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. And then a second account here, which I sent you at the bottom, is just a screen catch of one that closed yesterday, which was called Whistleblower, White House Leak. Okay. We were all hoping to avoid this. President Trump can't stay on message. He only wants to investigate states he lost. This will look bad. I have very little access to President Trump himself, but my boss does. He's absolutely demoralized by the unsteadiness. I can't believe I'm doing this, but until I lose my job, I'm going to tell you what I see and hear in this administration. And then somebody actually tweeted a picture of all the different alt accounts. There's like 14 of them that have just popped up in the last few days, including a couple of the ones that I read. And they will come and go, and not all of them are current employees. Some of them are fake. They'll be former employees, but it's a thing.
Yeah.
And it's just pretty amazing that it's happening.
It is rather amazing. Yeah, you got to watch for fakes, too. I guess eventually somebody will say, well, why don't I
you don't
start
know.
when
You
it's
really can't
pro-Trump?
tell.
Yeah. I guess, always be on guard. I can only say that.
Right. And then finally, to finish the segment and bring it all back, yesterday on the Pundit Roundup, we did a lot of the lies part of it, but I didn't do the second half because we didn't have time, and it really wasn't the focus of what we were talking about. But the second half of the Pundit Roundup was about science. It was about an article from Gizmodo on why scientists are speaking out, just like these accounts that I just read to you. There's an article from undark.org about how the science press has to get their act together. There's a piece from Kevin Folta, who's a food scientist, about how there's an ongoing attempt to suppress this by smearing science-friendly journalists, by doing Freedom of Information Acts on an ongoing basis by industry in order to intimidate the scientists. He's one of them, and dissuade journalists from talking to scientists. And there's one from Peter Brox on WordPress about how science communication in general has failed because scientists have been able to bring the facts to people, but not the reason for why they're important. They're lacking that overarching narrative. They haven't made the case for why it is so important in the modern world that the scientific idea of it's true because it's reproducible is so important to people. And if it's not important to people, you won't mind if it gets ripped out and thrown away and stepped on by Trump. Yeah. But if you do realize why that, well, for want of a better term, that binding narrative is there, then you will appreciate it and maybe fight for it.
Well, I hope so. Jeez. All right. Well, that's an important point that, it's their step 2 through 9, isn't it?
It is. And the scientists are getting quite upset. And, for example, the Gizmodo headline, here's why some scientists refuse to just stick to science, which is the same reason why some employees of the government who are generally, as a general rule, advocates but not activists, have just been turned into activists. Yeah. And it's pretty amazing, and it's happening right before our eyes, so it's just worth, paying attention to.
All right, then, I'll do it.
Good. So, here's one by Rachel Gross. Just add science. If election 2016 has taught us anything, is that journalists need to overhaul how they communicate science to an uncertain public. And I think that's all true. So I'm gonna drop those articles. You can decide what you want to do with them or not. But that's my segment for today, regardless.
Okay, yeah. Who cares what you say? That's it. That's my segment. Yeah, okay.
And thank you for letting me go through steps 2 through 9 to get to what Armando would have said. Yeah, well, that's obvious.
Right. He says, "Why does this surprise you?"
Why does this surprise you? Right?
Yeah. Okay.
And besides, you're wrong. I already skipped ahead. I know what you're going to say. You're wrong.
That's how you do it. Good morning. I'm wrong. Step 1 and 10, right there.
Right. I love Armando. I really hope he comes on the show more. It's great when we're both on together. But today, just me and you. Yeah. And I'm Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for putting up with these rants from me. It helps me start my day. And I'm in a much better mood after I yell at David. So thanks. Okay. I won't be on the show tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday.
You'll feel terrible.
I'll feel terrible, but then I'll feel good. Okay. Take care, and we'll talk to you.
Yes, all right. Thanks, Greg. A great start, as usual. I appreciate it. Thanks. We'll have to take a look at all this. Scientifically speaking, I don't know if we you know how time works, although I guess if we're really super scientific, we can slow down time if we move fast enough and get more stories in. So I just need to read at or near the speed of light, if that's possible. All right. Where the hell are we going to go with all this? I have opened a bunch of tabs. I've just been watching things happening on Twitter. I'm not convinced that they're the most important things, but I'll try and catch up with some of them. First of all, one weird thing. Let me just throw this out there because it's crazy. Everybody was laughing at Sean Spicer, not because he's an idiot and an incompetent necessarily as a press secretary, but something happened this morning. He tweeted out some kind of gobbledygook, and people were trying to decide whether he accidentally butt dialed something or whether he accidentally tweeted out a password to something, because it was the kind of combination of letters and numbers that could easily be taken for a password. Whether it was mistaken or not, I am not sure. You tell me. And I don't even know. Where do we even start with this thing? Is there a chain? I don't know. Matt Pierce, or depending on how he pronounces Pearce, was just, I guess, commenting on it. And then he ended up deleting his post on it because he says he deleted it because I don't know if that 8-digit alphanumeric stew is a password. And I don't know whether that's his claiming that it's a password that he was deleting or whether he deleted it because he really does believe that it is a password. And I saw, he's having a conversation out there with others. Garance Frank Ruda then saying, how do you know that was a password? And then was it Kevin Krause saying, well, look at the keyboard, this combination of letters and numbers that he put together, given where they're situated, it would be awfully difficult. What are you doing that you would have to have accidentally butt dialed this particular, crazy combination of letters and numbers? What was it, by the way? Am I giving out of it? I assume he's changed it by now, but I found it interesting. 9N25Y7AH, which, I don't know, certainly looks like one of those things you would put together as a password. It looks like actually a word and some kind of mnemonic device, perhaps a birthday or something like that interspersed. The word NYAH, which is sort of interesting. If that's not random, it's nya, like nya, I hate you, libs. We're going to. I wouldn't put it past him to make that part of his password. And then 9257. I just got curious, and I was like, "What's Sean Spicer's birthday? Tell me it isn't September 25th, 1970, or something like that, right? It isn't, is it?" I just want to point this out. It's not September 25th, 1970. It's September 23rd, 1971. Fingers crossed that that's not some sort of mishmash of his birth date, that every time he changes his password, he ups the birth date by one. I don't know. Can you imagine? That could be total garbage. That could be butt dialing. I got no idea. The problem is they're so freakishly incompetent, you have to worry about garbage like that. So there you have it. If it was once his birthday and he was just using 4 numbers and 4 letters as a mishmash, September 23rd, 1971, how would you do that if that was your birthday? 9, 2, 3, 7, and leave off the 1? 71, 9, 23, 71, but realizing that you're just doing a 4 and 4 combination, so just leave it out. I don't know. I guess, I've done things like that too. Not because of, not using my birthday necessarily, but I've used letter and number combinations, and then when I'm forced to change my password for security reasons, and I don't want to forget the new one, I'll up the number, but sometimes a different number, so I have this strange mishmash of things, and none of them are my birthday or anybody's birthday in my family at all. It's just happens to be a combination of letters and numbers that makes sense to me. I don't know. It would be worthless to continue speculating when there's so many other good things for us to look at and discuss. For instance, let's see, random. Again, Heidi Moore, who is described as editor and media consultant, writing for, among other places, in the past, Wall Street Journal, Guardian, etc. And Heidi has this bit from an AP story. Trump's team suggested that they would be nicer to Israel, who is, after all, an ally, if rabbis in Israel, and Orthodox rabbis in particular, recognized Ivanka's conversion. How interesting, I think, to point that out. The Jewish Week, it says, a New York newspaper, quoted an anonymous source with ties to Trump's presidential transition team as saying high-ranking aides had expressed concern to Israel regarding the legitimacy of Ivanka Trump's conversion, and that Israeli efforts to recognize her conversion would foster a closer relationship between the Trump family and Israel. As if it mattered at all whether there was a relationship between the Trump family and Israel. But again, Donald Trump himself does nothing better than conflate things as between his personality and his custodianship. The United States is me, and I'm the United States. If my daughter is insulted, the United States is insulted. We're going to have this kind of relationship with an ally in Israel instead of that kind of relationship, because there are rabbis in that country who won't recognize my daughter's conversion to Judaism. To what end that plays, I have no idea. It's just, I don't know what to tell you, and it seems awfully stupid, but it seems to be working. A spokeswoman for Trump did not return a request for confirmation, and Rabbi Levi Shem Tov, a rabbi in Washington who is close to Ivanka Trump, declined comment. A spokesman for one of Israel's chief rabbis said the proposed changes were a long time coming and not a direct result of Trump's election. I guess there's news, and we'll take a look at the AP article itself, which, by the way, and maybe this explains some of the importance of this issue to them. The headline is Ivanka Trump Jewish? In Israel, she has a Trump card. And this being reported from Israel by the AP. Is Ivanka Trump really Jewish? Last summer, Israel's religious authorities issued a ruling that raised doubts about her conversion to Judaism. And it's not that she didn't do it. It's that Israeli Orthodox rabbis in particular, I guess, because remember also, of course, you're talking about a country which recognizes itself as a Jewish state, that there's a religious component to its founding, which is not supposed to be the case here in the United States, so maybe it doesn't make quite as much sense to us. But it was founded as an overtly Jewish state, and so the state of Judaism, not the nation state of Israel, but the state of Judaism, or your status as a Jewish person, takes on additional importance in Israel because there's a religious component to the government, you see. That wouldn't be the case here. We wouldn't make a big deal out of it. That's how it rises to this level. Okay, so last summer, Israel's religious authorities issued a ruling that raised doubts about her conversion to Judaism. Again, not that she didn't do it, but that she didn't do it completely enough, or maybe there's no way for her to do it. They get very weird, and you can convert not having been born Jewish, and depending on the, on how serious you are about making sure that everybody accepts it. If you convert as a Reformed Jewish person, Orthodox won't accept it. If you reform, or if you convert as an Orthodox Jewish person, there are some sects of Orthodoxy that won't accept that. So you can't please everybody, but I guess if you're trying to please Israel's chief rabbis, it hasn't been done yet. But the article continues. After her father was elected president, they have changed their tune, raising eyebrows among activists who have long lobbied the rabbinical establishment to be more tolerant towards converts. Imagine you're just a regular person. You do all the damn things you're supposed to do, and yet they won't recognize you as Jewish, and this is important to you for some reason. And so you get frustrated. How about this? On top of that, a rich person gets elected president of the United States and becomes more powerful than ever before, and has a daughter who's converted the same way you did, and maybe she is Jewish after all. Well, what about me? I did all the same things. Well, you're not president of the United States, are you? That's not going to go over all that well. All right. President Donald Trump's daughter, of course, converted to Judaism under a prominent Orthodox rabbi in Manhattan before her 2009 marriage to Jared Kushner, an observant Jew, so it claims anyway. In its ruling last July, an Israeli government religious court rejected the legitimacy of another conversion by the same rabbi. Although it didn't directly affect Ivanka Trump, it raised questions as to whether Israel's powerful religious establishment would recognize her as being Jewish. But in early December, just weeks after Trump's election victory, Israel's chief rabbis said they would work to change the rules for recognizing conversions performed abroad, and they singled out Ivanka Trump. According to the new proposed plan, her conversion will be certified without the need for additional checks, the announcement said. Israeli activists say the sudden policy change appears to be an attempt to curry favor with the new U.S. president. Ivanka Trump's husband has been appointed as senior advisor to Trump and is expected to focus on Israeli-Palestinian peace efforts. An Israeli rabbinic committee has already met several times to discuss conversion policy, a speedier pace than usual, activists say. The timing is certainly suspicious, said Rabbi Seth Farber, director of ITIM, an organization that represents converts seeking recognition from the rabbinate. My biggest fear is that the rabbinate will find some way to find Ms. Trump kosher, yes, pun intended, but also not, to recognize her conversion, but leave thousands of other converts behind, simply saying they're not Jewish enough for us. The Jewish Week, the New York newspaper, right then we read that part, and that the Trump family is said to say, we might think differently about the state of Israel and our alliance with it if you would do us this little favor, right? It's a nice country you have there. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to it. Anyway, the chief rabbis over there say, no, the changes were a long time coming. Even before Ivanka Trump, it was talked about. Said one of their spokespeople, and I guess why even bother trying to mangle that? Pinchas Tenenbaum. I should have been more confident in my ability to read that name, but okay. Anyway, he added the media attention, added problems, and we take it to heart. Since Ivanka Trump does not live in Israel, for her, the issue is largely hypothetical, but for converts in Israel, the rabbinate's ruling affects their daily lives. If they're not recognized as Jewish, they're not permitted to marry in Israel, and they are technically ineligible for a religious burial when they die. Israel's Orthodox establishment doesn't recognize conversions performed by the more liberal Reform and conservative streams of Judaism, to which most American Jews belong, but immigration officials have more relaxed guidelines and do allow Reform and conservative converts to gain citizenship in Israel as Jews. These days, many Israelis simply wave off the rabbinate as irrelevant. Secular Israelis often wed in civil ceremonies abroad to avoid the rabbinate, while many ultra-Orthodox Jews dismiss the rabbinate's certification of kosher food as too lax. They have their own wings, right? It doesn't go far enough. Some Israelis perceive the rabbinate as corrupt. A former Israeli chief rabbi was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison this week, following charges of corruption and bribery. The rabbinate is a fossil of an institution that does not succeed in grappling with modern needs, said Nahum Barnea, a leading Israeli columnist. Most Israelis see the recognition of Ivanka Trump's Judaism, or lack of recognition, as a joke. Under the proposed reform, there would be clear guidelines for which rabbis abroad are deemed fit to perform conversions rather than the current practice of evaluating each individual convert. Imagine giving yourself that job. All foreign-born Jews seeking marriage licenses in Israel must first be checked by the rabbinate to ensure that they are indeed Jewish. I don't know what they do to you, but this is just to give you an idea of how nutty things get. Between 2013 and 2015, some 5,000 people asked to be recognized as Jews, according to rabbinate figures. Critics say Israeli rabbinical courts reject dozens of converts each year, claiming their Orthodox conversions were not stringent enough, and in some cases, questioning their motives and levels of observance. The issue reached a boiling point last year when an Israeli rabbinical court refused to recognize the conversion of a 31-year-old American, Nicole Zeitler. While working in New York, she converted to Judaism after a 1.5 years of study that included Hebrew lessons, a weekly questionnaire on Jewish topics, and twice-a-week meetings with Rabbi Haskell Luchstein, a senior rabbi in the U.S. Orthodox community who also oversaw Ivanka Trump's conversion. It was intense. I learned it, and I lived it, Zeitler said. She moved to Israel, became engaged to an Israeli, but a rabbinical court would not grant her a marriage license, dismissing Luchstein's credentials. At this point, I should probably end this story. This is not important to the United States, but we've got the Trump angle on it, and I can tell you this, by the way, in case anybody's wondering, there's no chance in the world that I would pass any of those tests if they were administered. This is just like the citizenship test, here in the United States. I could pass that one. But many people here, people who are screaming about, you come to this country and you got to speak English, couldn't pass that test ever. And immigrants do because they study it. And yet no one questions the citizenship of the native-born Americans because that's just one of those things. You're born here, that's it. Done. Unless, of course, you're brown, in which case we throw you out, right? Whereas, so similar situation here. I could never pass any of those tests. I wouldn't know a damn thing. But if I pick up and move to Israel now and say, yep, I'm Jewish, they say, yep, you are, despite the fact that I have never been Orthodox or anything like it. You were just born that way. Just like Lady Gaga. Isn't that interesting? Well, we all have our weirdnesses, I guess we could say. All right, well, that wasn't supposed to be a major theme of the day either, but what can you do? Garance Frank Ruda comes to the fore again. I guess she's just tweeting at the right time today. She has this snippet from another Politico story. I'll bet that the heart of it is contained here. We'll trust her clipping abilities and summary abilities. Bannon and Miller, Stephen Bannon, Stephen Miller, are writing the executive orders that we keep seeing so much about. We're hearing so much about from out of the White House, with little to no vetting or input from agency experts or even others in the White House, according to a Politico story, the heart of which is clipped here. Inside the West Wing, it is almost impossible for some aides to know what is in the executive orders, staffers say. Weren't we just addressing that the other day? It was one thing, a frustrating thing, a stupid thing, and practically, ought to be illegal but isn't quite illegal thing to say, the public doesn't know what's in these executive orders, but they don't even know inside the White House. They have been written by Stephen Miller, Trump's senior White House advisor for policy, and Steve Bannon, Trump's chief strategist, according to people familiar with the matter. Ideas for some of the Trump executive orders come from transition officials and so-called quote-unquote landing teams, sources say, who weren't working in the White House. Aides have also said that it was sometimes a game-time decision if Trump was going to sign a certain executive order that day. That also is extraordinarily unsettling. Let me take a look at the actual article here, by the way, in Politico, written by Isaac Arnsdorf, Josh Dawsey, and Sungmin Kim. The headline, Trump's flashy executive actions could run aground. The White House failed to consult with many of the agencies and lawmakers who will be critical for their success. There's no lawyers working on them, as it happens, and as it turns out. And that's actually extraordinarily important. You don't just get what you want out of them because you put it on paper and sign it, although that's what they were counting on. I'm telling you, at the weird level the weird level that we deal with law, not only on this show, isn't a show thing, but constitutional practice and constitutional law, it's the strangest thing. For stuff that's so important, it is very often, it's almost never black and white. Everything's a gray area. Everything, and again, it's the strangest thing because it's dealing with the Constitution, a written Constitution, written for a reason so that you wouldn't have this kind of interpretive nonsense happening around it. Well, it fails immediately because, there's always going to be something unwritten about it. And certainly that would include the norms of its interpretation. And that's how we get into some of these fights. It isn't supposed to be the case that just because you commit something to parchment and sign it, that it's a valid executive order and needs to be followed. But the presumption is that it will be, because to this point, the practice of issuing executive orders has always been careful, studied, measured. There have been some terrible executive orders, certainly some ideologically driven executive orders that haven't been vetted as carefully. But in a normal White House, it's a painstaking process. And for that reason, when it's committed to parchment and printed and signed and published, it does get an extraordinary amount of deference. It does end up having the force of law. And nobody ever says, what if this was something that an idiot scribbled on toilet paper in a bathroom and he's got no freaking clue whatsoever what the implications are, and even if he did have a clue, he wouldn't care. He knows that people bow down to these pieces of paper. So he's going to write, from now on, Sean Spicer gets all the free pizza from Domino's he wants, no matter what. Signed, Donald Trump. That's not an executive order. That's an idiot with a pen who snuck something in front of the other bozo and told him to sign it because something and to make America great and people want it. The guys with the hats, they love this thing. They asked you for it in the campaign, remember? So he signs it, and we have tremendous oh, we have this great thing about pizza. It's insane. So they are playing on, I guess the nearest parallel is when we've spent a long time explaining the deference that judges give in voting rights cases when a redistricting plan or something else similar gets the approval of the voting rights division at the Department of Justice, and that changes the burden of proof if you are complaining about the unfairness of it. And you have to bring your proof to one level. If the DOJ doesn't approve of this plan, then, you have a fair shot and you don't have to prove something different. You don't have to prove that there was any kind of collusion inside the DOJ or even inside of the state offices that prepared the thing in order to challenge it as facially discriminatory. But once they bless it, once they give it their pre-approval at the DOJ, now you got to prove that there was some wrongdoing at the DOJ and that there was some kind of collusion inside to deprive you of your rights, as opposed to, well, just look at the damn district. It's totally unfair on its face. You can whitewash it by giving it the rubber stamp. These guys similarly think, well, I want this to happen. I can't get this bill passed. There's no way Congress will ever do this. We'll do it as an executive order. And if you just put it on parchment and sign it, everybody knows that usually painstaking legal research goes into this stuff. And a lot of political maneuvering as well, that we've brought the stakeholders to the table, and some are happy and some are not, but they're going to accept this outcome because the lawyers have told them, yes, this will work. And that's how it rose to the level of getting printed on parchment and placed before the president. But if you eliminate all of that and just dress the thing up as legal and send it out, people will still make the same mistaken assumption that you worked on it. Just as we're always saying, oh, well, that guy has a suit and tie on when he said it, and so therefore he's an expert. And he wrote a book on it. It's self-published, and it's full of spelling errors, and it's completely, ridiculous from start to finish. But it is a book, and he does have a tie. Therefore, he's on television telling people who don't know any different that, the world is upside down. We have the same situation going on, I guess, in some of these executive orders. Their story in Politico begins this way. President Donald Trump's team made little effort to consult with federal agency lawyers and lawmakers as they churned out executive actions this week, stoking fears the White House is creating the appearance of real momentum. And I would say creating fears that the White House is creating appearances of actual legal acumen with flawed orders that might be unworkable, unenforceable, or even illegal. The White House didn't ask State Department experts to review Trump's memorandum on the Keystone XL pipeline, even though the company that wants to build the pipeline is suing the U.S. for $15 billion, according to two people familiar with the matter. Wouldn't that be hilarious if somehow the executive order lost that case for us? Thanks. $15 billion. Well done. Defense Secretary James Mattis and CIA Director Mike Pompeo were blindsided by a draft order that would require agencies to reconsider using interrogation techniques that are currently banned as torture, according to sources with knowledge of their thinking. Yes, one of the other big stories of the day from yesterday, telling interviewers that torture works and that the people he spoke to at the CIA all said the same. I heard from the experts that torture works. We'll see one day, I guess, and we'll see whether the folks at The Hague agree with you. Well, Mattis and Pompeo say they were blindsided by this thing. Just a small circle of officials at the Department of Health and Human Services knew about the executive action starting to unwind Obamacare, and they got a heads up only the night before it was released. Key members of Congress weren't consulted either, according to several members, and at a conference in Philadelphia, Republican legislators say they had no idea whether some of the executive orders would contrast with existing laws because they hadn't reviewed them. The breakneck pace of Trump's executive actions might please his supporters, because they don't give a damn one way or the other, right? Legalities. That's why I hate politicians. Stupid lawyers. Lawyers are always ruining everything, except that's the way things work. And they've put an awful long time into the study of how those things work, and they are steps 2 through 9. Critics are questioning whether the documents are being rushed through without the necessary review from agency experts and lawmakers who will bear the burden of actually carrying them out. Steps 2 through 9. For example, there are legal questions on how the country can force companies building pipelines to use materials manufactured domestically, which might not be available or which could violate trade treaty obligations. There is also the question of whether the federal government can take billions from cities who don't comply with immigration enforcement actions. Legal experts said it was unclear. You want to make sure when you're dealing with high stakes, important issues, you're getting the best information from the breadth of experience that exists in the government, says Max Steyer, president of the Partnership for Public Service, a nonpartisan nonprofit that supports the civil service. You don't know what you don't know. The White House did not respond to a request for comment. Trump, less than a week into his presidency, is continuing the improvisational style he used to run his company, into the ground, I would add, his campaign and his transition, in relying on a small circle of trusted advisors to act decisively. And he's emphasizing the theatrics of autographing official-looking, leather-bound documents in the Oval Office. People familiar with Trump's planning say he wanted daily events to show supporters he would follow through on the items of his campaign agenda. He was determined to show people that he's getting to work from day one, one person familiar with his planning said. This person said he wanted to take charge and show his supporters that former President Barack Obama's tenure was decisively over. But the process is playing out chaotically, both inside the White House and throughout the federal government. Inside the West Wing, it's almost impossible for some aides to know what is in the executive orders, staffers say. They have been written by Stephen Miller, Trump's senior White House advisor for policy, and Steve Bannon, Trump's chief strategist, according to people familiar with the matter. Ideas for some of the Trump executive orders came from transition officials. We read this right before, from the landing teams who aren't working in the White House. Aides have also said it was sometimes a game-time decision if Trump was going to sign a certain executive order that day. The only other administration to begin with such swift executive actions was Ronald Reagan's. This will not help invalidate this with people, said David Vladeck, a law professor at Georgetown University and a former official at the Federal Trade Commission. Those directives were more heavily vetted, though. If you don't run these kinds of initiatives through the affected agencies, you're going to get something wrong, Vladeck said. A government by edict is not a sustainable idea. By contrast, the Obama White House ran executive orders through a painstaking weeks-long process of soliciting feedback from agencies and briefing lawmakers, according to a former official. I think I just said formal official, but former official. Sometimes it even asked expert lawyers in the private sector to check its work. What? House aides said they were largely unaware of Trump's executive orders as they were being drafted, but that it isn't that surprising coming from Trump, according to a senior Republican aide. Congressional leadership has tried to keep up with shifting policies from the Trump administration, according to several aides, who say Trump's top officials often seem uninterested in details. Well, I think that you'll see this is obviously a transition that's underway here, South Dakota Senator John Thune, third-ranking Senate Republican, said in Philadelphia as he opened the Republican retreat there. I expect you'll see, probably, better coordination with time. There's also an irony in Trump flexing his executive power so fully because the approach goes against what Trump and Republican members of Congress have said about executive actions in the past. We'll just skip the next paragraph or so, which just reminds you, remember, they hated it when Barack Obama was doing it. And, of course, Trump, in his own fashion, basically tweeted that Barack Obama was a tyrant for using the very same mechanism. Former Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, now a lobbyist, said he continues to have deep reservations about any aggressive use of executive action, whether it comes from a Republican or a Democrat. Yeah, right? But he does say, you don't want to have an imperial president. It's just not the best way to govern. Okay. Lott said he understood that Trump wanted to come out of the gate quickly, but he applauded some of the actions, including the pipeline change. But I've been where Mitch is going to be, who's going to have to say, Mr. President, we can't do that, or we will not do that. Sometimes the president needs that. Well, he needs that. He's just not going to get it. Everybody's afraid to do it for whatever reason. So, yeah, you could take it from there. I think we'll just stop at this point so we can move on to other issues of the day. But it's worrying, no doubt. Let's see. There's also this one. Zephyr Teachout is in the Washington Post with this op-ed. something that we hinted at the other day. Trump is getting payments from foreign governments. We have no idea what they are. She said, have studied the emoluments clause for years. Now I'm part of a lawsuit alleging that President Trump is violating it. Yes, she is a part of, one, she's a law professor at Fordham University, and two, part of the lawsuit that we mentioned the other day was filed on Monday regarding the emoluments clause. She puts it this way. Gives you a little history. In the middle of the 17th century, remember that one? It's an awesome century, man. King Charles II of England took a secret pension from the French King Louis XIV. That does seem problematic, right? King of England taking money secretly from the King of France. He agreed to have a closer relationship, including a treaty that wasn't clearly in England's best interest. The precise content of the secret agreement wasn't revealed for more than 100 years. Those of you who know what happened eventually to King Charles II, okay, so he got his comeuppance, yes, but all right, you can see why it might be a problem. And surely at the time, people said, holy cow, what? You're taking money from the King of France? And surely the answer was, hey, everybody wants England and France to have a closer relationship, right? We've been antagonistic. We've been enemies for so long. Now we could finally settle that. It would be great if we could coexist peacefully. Who's opposed to that? Does that sound familiar? Today, 350 years later, the President of the United States is receiving payments from foreign countries. The money comes to President Trump by way of his companies, although the details and the scope of his profits are secret. He refused to disclose his tax returns. After the election, Trump had several months to move toward liquidation and putting his assets in a truly blind trust. He has chosen instead to keep his ownership interests in his business, turning over operations decisions to his children, but remaining an owner. His decision threatens the integrity of American democracy and national security, and it should ring alarm bells for all citizens, regardless of political party. Time out just for a second. Did everybody catch the important nuance in there? I suppose if you asked people, if you interviewed people randomly on the street and said, did you see, you only get about 5 people who will say, yeah, I saw that. I either watched the press conference or I heard about the press conference where he said, I'm turning it all over to my sons, right? And then if you ask those people who said they were aware of that and you ask them, did Trump just give all of his shares in the company to his sons? That too would not be a blind trust, but he didn't even do that. All he did was say, well, the business decisions for operations will be made by my sons, but I still own the 50% that I always did. Gee whiz, if my sons happen to make decisions based on, information that I might happen to share with them, and it happened to benefit me tremendously because I'm an absentee owner now, well, what can you do? But at least it's blind. That's his definition of a blind trust. It's not even that he gave his shares to his kids who will then just kick money back to him. He kept the shares. He just said, my idiot sons will be the ones to decide whether or not the Trump letters on the outside of the building should be 6.5 feet tall or 7. I hope they're smart enough to choose 7. Anyway, I don't care. I hope they're dumb enough to choose 6 and get fired. Whatever. Anyway, back to the article. He has chosen instead to keep the ownership interest in the business, turning operations decisions over to the children but remaining an owner, right? Trump's choice violates one of the most overlooked but important sections of the U.S. Constitution, the Foreign Emoluments Clause, as well as some other ones, which was framed to avoid problems of split loyalty such as that posed by Charles II. As a law professor, I began exploring the clause in 2009 while examining the framers' near obsession with protecting against corruption. The clause represented a deliberate break from European traditions where financial relationships between a country's representatives and other governments were common, and it epitomized the particularly demanding notion of corruption held by our framers. I never expected the clause to be litigated. Presidents and federal officials have gone out of their way to avoid violating it until now. But Trump's blatant violation of the clause is a violation of our fundamental document and our fundamental principles. I add here, the problem with fundamental documents and fundamental principles is they're so fundamental that nobody ever wrote down what should we do if somebody violates it, except to say, Well, I guess impeachment is available, but what do you do if somebody violates it and then everybody sits on their hands and goes, I don't know. I'm so afraid. I've been so conditioned to become afraid of impeachment that I won't take that up. Plus, he's in my party and he might share the money with me. What do you do? Back to the article. That's why nonpartisan watchdog group Citizens for Ethics and Responsibility in Washington, CREW, you may know them as, filed suit in federal court this week to seek a declaratory judgment and injunction. I am one of the lawyers on the case. The framers were trained to be wary of how human nature can be tempted and of international incentives to tempt. As George Washington said later, few men have virtue to withstand the highest bidder. Our Constitution was written in the hot summer of 1787 in Philadelphia, where the Republicans are now. But the convention was haunted by recent European failures and the long-ago corruption of Rome. Secret money from foreign countries was a repeat topic, with the framers wary of the melancholy picture of foreign intrusions and intrigues. The British experience with Charles II was a warning that even heads of state could be influenced by foreign powers. They killed that guy, by the way. The framers understood that humans are inclined to look more favorably upon those who are responsible for their wealth. In private affairs, warmth towards someone who is given a gift or with whom one has a good business relationship is a positive emotion that enables human connection. But in public affairs, that sometimes unconscious influence can be insidious. The framers had also seen how George III, who was crazy, used his power to create a side employment relationship with parliamentarians he wanted to influence. So the Constitution includes more than a dozen anti-corruption provisions, several of which are targeted specifically to protecting against foreign influence. For instance, only natural-born citizens can be president. Foreigners are not allowed to hold federal office, and a long residential period is required so candidates would not be mere tools of wealthy foreign powers. Whoops. The Foreign Emoluments Clause prohibits federal officers from accepting foreign gifts, emoluments, and titles of nobility without congressional consent. Another oops. A recent white paper by Harvard law professor Larry Tribe and attorney Joshua Matz explains extensively, citing the meaning of the word at the time of the Constitutional Convention. Emoluments include the profits of an official receives in the course of business relationships. The Emoluments Clause did not come easy. The rule was such a serious break from European tradition that its adoption caused problems for several decades, and other countries were likely to take offense when they attempted to give gifts in violation of the clause. President Martin Van Buren had to write a letter to the Imam of Muscat, telling him he could not accept horses, pearls, a Persian rug, shawls, and a sword because it was a, quote, fundamental law of the Republic which forbids its servants from accepting presents from foreign states or princes. The framers knew what a headache it would become, but they included it anyway because of the lessons of history. They knew that foreign governments would necessarily attempt to influence U.S. policy, and they wanted the Constitution to protect against that. Some corruption rules rely on proof that a deal happened, an explicit arrangement exchanging something of value for a political action with intent to trade. Such laws are notoriously difficult to prosecute, see Bob McDonnell in Virginia, because it is rare that either of the parties to an explicit bribe would come forward to report a crime. The law applies well to the keystone cops of politics, clumsy lawmakers who take sacks of cash in the IHOP bathroom. Maybe. The Emoluments Clause, however, does not require direct proof of anything untoward, and that is essential to its effectiveness. If it is effective, we'll see. The most powerful anti-corruption rules are prophylactic, forbidding a whole category of relationships that are likely to lead to corruption. Consider the countries we know are making payments to Trump companies through state-owned entities, payments that affect Trump's wealth. China and the United Arab Emirates, both at the heart of regions critical to U.S. foreign policy. Then consider the longer list of countries in a position to benefit him because of business relationships Trump has, including India, Indonesia, Turkey, the Philippines, Great Britain, and Vietnam. This is just a beginning sketch of what we know so far. Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Taiwan reportedly may also be involved with Trump businesses. The benefits come from a range of relationships. The Qatari state airline pays rent at Trump Tower in New York. So does the Bank of China, of course. Entities in Britain, Bulgaria, Brazil, Indonesia, and Vietnam reportedly make licensing payments for the rights to produce local versions of The Apprentice, Trump's TV reality show. His developments in India require governmental permitting, which under the law would be a forbidden benefit. Each of these countries, and possibly more, now has a direct mechanism to attempt to influence the president. What's more, every time Trump makes a foreign policy decision that relates to any of these countries, citizens will wonder whether he, like Charles II, put his own financial interest ahead of American jobs, or whether he's engaging in or refraining from military action because of a business relationship. Trump's lawyers made a strange concession in a news conference recently, announcing that Trump would donate all profits from foreign government payments to Trump hotels to the U.S. Treasury. The suggestion was that the donation mooted the problem. But another unspoken implication was that there is something troubling about foreign-derived profits. The donation does nothing to address the constitutional violation, which occurs at the moment of accepting the benefit, even if Trump's hotel loses money on the transaction. It merely means that some of his constitutional violations will be followed by a payment of penance. Moreover, profits from the hotel represent only a part of the foreign benefits that are flowing to him. None of his office towers, condos, or apartment sales, licensing agreements, or loans on other properties are covered at all. The donations appear to be a nod to how presidents have treated foreign gifts. With statutory permission of Congress, they have donated them to the Treasury or the National Archives. That proved tricky when Bulgaria gave George W. Bush a puppy, for instance. In those instances, though, the donation was appropriate because it flowed from consent by Congress, which the Constitution requires. The point of strong corruption laws like the Emoluments Clause is that they take the president out of the position of being the judge of inappropriateness. In Trump's case, though, he has proposed that an official at his company will do exactly that. Even Trump will, on occasion, acknowledge the seeds of a problem. Of Turkey, he said, I have a little conflict of interest because I have a major building in Istanbul. At a news conference this month, he announced that he would not engage in deals in Russia because it would present a conflict. The Washington Post reported last year on strong evidence that Trump's businesses have received significant funding from Russian investors, and that's a kind way of putting it. If there's a conflict with Russia, there's a conflict with every country. More important, since Trump hasn't disclosed any information about his finances, how would we know? These are not trivial potential conflicts. They strike at the heart of what it means to be president. Undivided loyalty to one's country. The least Trump can do is stop violating the Constitution by accepting secret money from foreign governments. Well, that is the least he could do. He's just not going to do it. That's too bad, isn't it? Okay. What other fun things do we need to catch up with? Well, let's see. I said that there was the Politico article that we might want to try and dissect. But first, I needed to add this part. One more trip back to the idiocy of Trump's insistence that there totally is voter fraud and that it reaches the level of millions of votes. He did offer a specific example yesterday, and it was one of the more bizarre things probably that he'll ever utter. Glenn Thrush, actually, reporting this for the New York Times. He's moved on to there. And he had what I guess was probably the story of the evening last night. Trump's voter fraud example, a troubled tale with Bernhard Langer. I don't know how many of you are professional golf fans. And of that, how many of you are long-standing enough as professional golf fans to know Bernhard Langer? He's extraordinarily famous in golf circles, I think, rather obviously. But he's not a current, he does occasionally still play in current PGA Tour events. He's over 50, so he can play on the senior tour, and, he can win a lot more money over there. But that aside, famous guy, no doubt about it. Anyway, here's this story here. On Monday, President Trump gathered House and Senate leaders in the state dining room for a get-to-know-you reception. We know all about that. But I thought interesting detail in here. It served them tiny meatballs and pigs in a blanket. I hate small food. He should have done that line, right? And quickly launched into a story meant to illustrate what he believed to be rampant, unchecked voter fraud. Mr. Trump kicked off the meeting, participants said, by retelling his debunked claim that he would have won the popular vote if not for the 3 to 5 million ballots cast by, quote, illegals. He followed it up with a Twitter post early Wednesday calling for a major investigation into voter fraud. Now, I was wondering about this too. Like when he brought it up, why people didn't, well, I know why you don't punch him in the face. He's the president. Okay. Well, why they didn't say anything? Why did they leave? Why did Democrats who were there not say, are you out of your mind? Well, apparently they did. And we don't know exactly what they said. But when one of the Democrats protested, Mr. Trump said he was told a story by, quote, the very famous golfer, Bernhard Langer. And he is very famous. He's right about that. Whom he described as a friend, according to 3 staff members who were in the room for the meeting. Now, I'm not sure whose staff they were. That it doesn't say. But if they were White House staff and they're telling this story, then Trump and all his grousing to ABC News about the Democrats, they're the one they didn't keep it confidential. It could have been his own staff. Anyway, that's not the point of this story. In the emerging Trump era, the story was a memorable example for the legislators and the country of how an off-the-cuff yarn, unverifiable and of confusing origin, became a prime policy mover for a president whose fact-gathering owes more to the oral tradition than the written word. That's a very kind way of putting it. The 3 witnesses recalled Mr. Langer being the protagonist of the story, although a White House official claimed the president had been telling a story relayed to the golfer by one of Mr. Langer's friends. The witness described the story this way. Mr. Langer, a 59-year-old native of Bavaria, Germany, a winner of the Masters twice and of more than 100 events on major professional golf tours around the world, was standing in line at a polling place near his home in Florida on Election Day, the president explained, when an official informed Mr. Langer he would not be able to vote. Now this is where it really starts to get hairy, but I guess before we even deliver the stinging bit here, since when first of all, like, since when are you standing in line to vote somewhere and the officials come out and they don't wait for you to check in and tell you, no, you can't vote. They go out to greet you in line and say, hi, you can't vote. That's what eventually happens here. But wait. There's a more ridiculous part here, right? Okay, so the story continues. Ahead of and behind Mr. Langer, according to this tale that he's telling, were voters who did not look as if they should be allowed to vote, Mr. Trump said, according to the staff members, but they were nonetheless permitted to cast provisional ballots. The president threw out the names of Latin American countries that the voters might have come from. Now, that, it seems, I don't know. Is he trying to say that that was part of Langer's story, whether the story was about Langer himself or, as other staffers are claiming, about a friend of Langer's to whom Langer had supposedly talked? I don't know. But the idea of throwing out the Latin American countries that the voters might have come from, what are you talking about? And I mean, the big tip-off, they didn't look as if they should be allowed to vote. You're a moron, a racist moron, period. You can't say that without this, as I said when tweeting about it yesterday, this rises to like grandpa gets thrown out of Thanksgiving dinner level ridiculous racism. Just that kind of thing. I mean, there's KKK style racism and then there's, oh my God, grandpa's losing his mind kind of racism, which you like try and wince through somehow, but occasionally it rises to the level where it's like, Grandpa, you can't stay at the table with us if you're going to talk like that. Stop it. I don't know where they were from. They could have been from anywhere. Like, I don't know. And then he names as many Latin American countries as he possibly could. What do you mean by the kind of people who don't look like they should be allowed to vote? Like the kind of people that look like they might be from Ecuador or something. I mean, oh my God, Grandpa, stop it. Just eat. You know, you can picture this happening in a movie somewhere. Dad, shut up. Just eat. You want to eat turkey with us? Just eat the damn turkey. No more of this. I don't want my kids hearing this. You kids don't know how to raise it. Oh my God. What a disaster. But there he is telling the story. And I guess trying to pass it off that like, oh, you think I'm racist? Bernhard Langer is the one who said this. Just wait. Mr. Langer, who he described as a supporter, left feeling frustrated, according to a version of events later contradicted by a White House official. I think Glenn has updated this story a little bit since I originally read it, but okay. So, the anecdote, the aide said, was greeted with silence. And Mr. Trump was prodded to change the subject by Reince Priebus, the White House chief of staff, and Senator John Cornyn, Republican of Texas. Okay. So hold on a second. So there we are. So the story is that Longer told me that he was standing in line to vote in Boca, and they said, "You can't vote here, Mr. Longer," and yet they let these other people cast provisional ballots, even though they maybe sort of looked like they might be from Latin America. This is horrible. So one interpretation of this is, well, a white German guy should be at least allowed to cast a provisional ballot if the brown Ecuadorians can, even though we don't know where any of those people are, where they're from. Equally ridiculous, of course, is that a elections official comes out to the line and looks over this group and says, You're Bernhard Langer. You can't vote here. Now, why can't Bernhard Langer vote? It's not just that he's a native of Bavaria. It's that he's still a citizen of Germany. He's not an American citizen. So I did see a couple of people wondering, I think a couple of reporters yesterday wondering aloud, why would Bernhard Langer go to the polls under the assumption that he could cast a ballot? I'm fairly certain he knows he's not an American citizen. Then, of course, to show up and start saying, well, I know I'm not an American citizen, but neither are these people. They're brown. What? So it starts to sound like maybe Bernhard Langer is a super racist, too. And it's entirely possible. Not because he's German. I think they're over that for the most part. Although he's 57, he's an older German. But hey, I think they were maybe more sensitive to that. Who knows? Anyway, it's more that, well, I say it is possible. I will say this. Professional golfers in general, like high-level golfers, but professional golfers tend to be a very conservative lot. It's just kind of the way things go. It's a game that, there's nothing, so you won't play the game better because you're a racist. It's just, you tend to move, and, golf is played in some exclusive circles. It just is. And in order to get good at it, and then once you're good enough at it that you're at the elite level, you just sort of stay in this pretty closed circle. Especially if you're a touring pro, you're really just literally flying from country club to country club and playing golf with other rich weirdos. Anyway, we don't know anything about what Mr. Langer thinks in his private moments, but we do know this, right? We'll continue on with the story. There's just one problem, although there are 5,000. I don't know why you would use that phrase. Just 25,000 problems, but the first one I'll give you is this. Mr. Langer, who lives in Boca Raton, Florida, is a German citizen with permanent residence status in the United States, who is, by law, barred from voting, according to Mr. Langer's daughter, Christina. He is a citizen of Germany, she said when reached on her father's cell phone. He is not a friend of President Trump's, and I don't know why he would talk about him. She said her father was very busy and would not be able to answer any questions. But a senior White House staff member who was not at the Monday reception but has heard Mr. Trump tell the story, so he does it a lot, said Mr. Langer saw Mr. Trump in Florida during the Thanksgiving break and told him the story of a friend of Mr. Langer's who had been blocked from voting. Either way, the tale left its mark on Mr. Trump, who is known to act on anecdote, and on Wednesday redoubled his efforts to build a border wall and crack down on immigrants crossing the border from Mexico. The story, the aide added, had made a big impression on Mr. Trump. It's just not big enough for Mr. Trump to have remembered, did this happen to Bernhard Langer, or did Bernhard Langer tell me a story of it happening to someone else? And no matter whether it was Langer himself or someone Langer knew, if the story was ever told to him at all, and I have my doubts that it might have been, then possibly Bernhard Langer is describing a story of another incredible racist who simply says, well, what? Now, who left frustrated, I guess, is the big question now. And I guess what might have happened here is that Bernhard Langer, I don't know, he might be extraordinarily conservative. He might be pro-Trump, but not necessarily consider himself a friend of Donald Trump's. And he might have heard from another racist neighbor, I was standing in line to vote at Boca Raton, even though there were some brown people around me, and they got to vote. But there's no word on whether the racist friend of Bernhard Langer was turned away or not. But where does that element of the story come from? I don't even know if that happens. I don't know if any of it happens. This sounds an awful lot like something Donald Trump made up out of whole cloth. He may possibly have had an assist on it from Bernhard Langer. But who cares? I can't imagine why that's important, and I can't believe that the national press and me are going to have to spend time speaking about Bernhard Langer and his impact on United States policy. Hey, by the way, what do you think we should do with Obamacare? Did somebody get me Corey Pavin on the line? Is Scott Verplank available? Do we need to stay with foreign golfers? Maybe Colin Montgomery has something he wants to say about Social Security, ladies and gentlemen. Just hold on a minute. We're going to have a switchboard, and we can just bring in all the golfers, and they can tell you what what you need to know about domestic policy. Holy mackerel. It's a very weird situation. I had to mention that one. That's crazy. So let's see. Other things that I have to mention. I'll just mention this one quickly. We could give the full reading to it. Hunter keeps things pretty succinct. I picked up this story elsewhere, and then I thought, let me let Hunter tell it, because he does it well. How's that? Well, just leave it at that. Ka-ching! Trump hotels plan to triple their locations under Trump, and Mar-a-Lago cashes in. Here we come to the point of the true profiteering going on, with respect to the Trump properties and the domestic emoluments clause. It's illustrated by the way of a photo of the ribbon cutting for the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C., which reveals another interesting thing, I guess, about Trump and his family. One, it's the ribbon cutting, and two, there's a stage inside the building, and what they're doing is they're having two hotel staffers hold the ribbon in front of, from left to right, Don Jr., Eric, Donald Trump, Melania, Tiffany, and Ivanka. They've all got a pair of ceremonial scissors. The amount of money the Trump family spends on scissors, you won't believe. And they're all going to cut this piece of ribbon. Now, ordinarily, this is a symbolic thing, and it usually the symbolism around the building industry has gotten a little bit ridiculous. But it's so far removed from the reality of the building, they should just stop doing these things. But these ribbon cuttings, normally you would have a ribbon across like the doorway, the entryway into the building, and the important person would essentially do, it's like a christening of a boat. You'd snip the ribbon and then people could go in. Everybody's already in here, but they want to have a ribbon cutting for photo purposes, so they just have, you guys, hold this ribbon. And then 19,000 of my friends will all have ceremonial scissors, and we'll all cut the ribbon. We'll cut the ribbon to ribbons. And poof, we're open. I mean, I shouldn't complain, because you often see, elected officials are all the time, put up a new public building, and they all get hard hats and silver shovels, and then there's a box. They build a box and put dirt in it in front of a place. It's a groundbreaking ceremony, everybody. Instead of breaking ground, why don't you take this ceremonial shovel and overturn a shovel of potting soil while wearing a doofus hat? Okay, so it happens everywhere. Now it's happening here. The other thing, by the way, this one just struck me. I'm looking at the picture. They're all about the same height, which is weird, because if you look up their heights, you remember when we were talking about Donald Trump might be exaggerating his height, that he added an extra inch to his height. He's 6'3", he says, instead of 6'2", because his weight is obese at 6'2", but not obese at 6'3", so he says he's 6'3". Granted, the women in the picture, the Trump women, are wearing heels, and that will raise them up a couple of inches. Melania looks to be about 1 inch shorter than Donald Trump in this photo, which in heels makes her, if he's right, 6'2". Tiffany looks a little bit shorter than Melania is, but the bun on top of her head is making up for it. Ivanka looks to be just a little bit taller than the rest of them, the women, but again, so now in heels, she's 6'3", 3. Eric Trump, I looked up, is listed at 6'5", and he is definitely taller than his father. But Don Jr. is listed at 6'1", and he looks to be no taller than his dad at all, and his dad no taller than he is. This is very weird. It's a family full of liars, so no news there. Anyway, just analyzing the picture. What really matters, of course, is in the article itself. Hunter puts it this way. Trump's promise to engage in no new deals. You remember when that was the promise? He switched it, of course, at the press conference. He said no new foreign deals. But even that will be broken. But Trump's promise to engage in no new deals, which is what he had promised before the press conference, has already fallen apart. And he says, no new deals while President of the United freaking States, as he says, was already off to an implausible start. As President-elect, Trump promised he'd be putting his family in charge of the family business, and then proceeded to invite said family members to his meetings with foreign dignitaries, important business heads, and transition meetings. He's also closed plenty of deals between November and now comes word that many more buildings with his overly plump name on them will just coincidentally be coming to cities near you during his presidency. And a quote here from, I gotta move things around on the screen in order to tell where it comes from, but Bloomberg is the source here. President Donald Trump's hotel management company wants to expand its namesake luxury hotels across the U.S. while it holds off on new overseas business, its chief executive officer said. Now, I read elsewhere that they were looking at something like, they said, we're in about 5 cities in America, but there are some 20 plus major metropolitan areas in the United States, and there's no reason why there shouldn't be a Trump hotel in every single one of them. And someone more clever than me pointed out very quickly, we got to have those so that we can then issue executive orders that all traveling federal employees working anywhere, traveling for business, will be mandated to stay in Trump hotels so that every time a federal government official goes somewhere, I make money. Whoops, did I say that out loud? I didn't mean to. The reason Trump's business probably won't be expanding overseas probably has to do less with avoiding the appearance of impropriety, never a high concern among Trump executives, and more to do with the brand's new distinction as the world's most high-profile terrorist target. But Trump's executives figure they can profit off the Trump name here at home, and after Trump's stint in the Oval Office, will be able to return his business to his own hands with, according to CEO Danziger, up to 3 times as many hotels as the company currently operates. Does this count as Donald Trump in his capacity as president personally profiting off his presidency? Hasn't he divested from this or other businesses? Well, he hasn't. So yes, it will count that way. Will there be conspicuous pressure on cities to approve the Trump-labeled expansions, lest they run afoul of the president's personal displeasure? Of course. That's what the company is counting on. Trump's current properties are also unapologetically profiting off his new White House position. Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, newly advertised by Trump as his winter White House, and expected to be a regular destination for Trump and staff, has now doubled their member initiation fee to $200,000. Why? Because now members will be able to regularly gain the ear of a sitting president. And to individuals with a lot of cash and issues that they might want their president to know about, that's a price well worth paying. Trump hasn't divested from Mar-a-Lago either. He's merely put his ownership in a trust, which will revert back to him in 4 years, meaning the new membership fees will go, in part, to him. Is this a level of crookedness that Republican lawmakers will readily and eagerly go along with and even help facilitate in order to consolidate their own power? Paul Ryan would personally cut the ribbons on the new hotels himself if it means he gets to dismantle a few more programs for poor and middle-class Americans. Welcome to the kleptocracy, and it's only week 1. Bring your checkbook or get out. Thanks to Hunter for bringing us that one. There's a few more things that we need to check in on, but I did say that, why don't we end up then with taking a look at the Politico piece and also an accompanying, well, not accompanying, but a similar piece in Huffington Post yesterday. This one, I think, these two, I think, are important in terms of discussing something that I think is probably circulating among the listenership and the readership at Daily Kos. you'll read headlines like this: Democrats launch scorched earth strategy against Trump in Politico, and the Huffington Post's Democrats want to pick their battles with Trump. Their base wants all-out war, and say, yes, I recognize this problem, and I am angry with, pick a name out of a hat. Chuck Schumer. He's voting for too many of the appointees. He's not with us. He's not fighting Trump tooth and nail. And it's true. He is voting that way. And it's true. He's not necessarily fighting tooth and nail if you get to define fighting tooth and nail as just voting no on everybody and delaying everything as much as possible. There are many different approaches to how the fight should be undertaken, and how the fight, how you can get the same results, but still have some different political optics. I guess we could put it that way. I guess we'll start with the Politico article only. It's the second in time, but it was the one I just mentioned earlier. So we'll take a look at it. This is Gabriel De Benedetti has written this one. Democrats launch scorched earth strategy against Trump, and then a quote that begins as a subheader. They were entitled to a grace period and they blew it. Remember, that was the quote of Governor Jay Inslee of Washington. It's been worse than I could have imagined the first few days, he went on to say. So we got this. What began as a high-minded discussion about how to position Democratic Party against President Donald Trump appears to be nearing its conclusion. The bulk of the party has settled on a scorched earth, not now, not ever model of opposition. Have they? And where is this discussion taking place? Well, stay tuned. You'll learn. In legislative proposals, campaign promises, donor pitches, and even some Senate hearings, Democrats have opted for a hard line, give no quarter posture, a reflection of a seething party base that will have it no other way. And yet we keep reading stories, for instance, about Elizabeth Warren, for instance, voting yes in committee on Ben Carson's nomination to head the HUD department, right? And what do you make of that? I mean, voting yes in committee doesn't make him HUD secretary. Voting yes or no, for that matter, on the floor won't make a difference as to whether he becomes HUD secretary either, because basically they're going to vote more or less along party lines, and the 52 Republicans in the Senate are expected, under threat of death probably from President Trump, to vote yes on this. He's going to become the HUD secretary, barring, I don't even know what would have to happen to put the kibosh on that. So, in one sense, voting yes in committee makes no difference one way or the other in terms of the outcome. And I assume that a lot of these Democrats are calculating, well, if I vote yes, it doesn't change the outcome and it doesn't speed the process up any either. But eventually, when I'm running for re-election and I'm attacked as a partisan Democrat who couldn't even vote for a single one of President Trump's cabinet appointees, they can say, oh no, hold on a second, I did vote for at least one of them. And then, of course, everyone will say, oh my gosh, the attack is so ineffectual. Yeah, that's right, I'm voting for Elizabeth Warren. That's exactly how it'll go, right? I have my doubts about that strategy. But I also recognize that they do feel like they can't be the one that gets singled out as the one who voted against every single one of them for some reason. According to interviews with roughly 24 party leaders and elected office holders, the article continues, the internal debate over whether to take the conciliatory path, to pursue a high road approach as a contrast to Trump's deeply polarizing and norm-violating style, is largely settled, cemented in place by a transition and first week in office that has confirmed the left's worst fears about Trump's temperament. I would assert, by the way, it affirms everyone's worst fears about Trump's temperament, including those of the right and those who are both on the right and dedicated Trump supporters. They have their own worst fears about Trump's temperament, and those are being confirmed. It just isn't changing their behavior any. They were entitled to a grace period, but it was midnight on the night of inauguration to 8 o'clock the next morning when the administration sent out people to lie about numerous significant things, and the damage to the credibility of the presidency has already been profound, said Washington Governor Jay Inslee. They were entitled to a grace period and they blew it. It's been worse than I could have imagined the first few days. That conclusion comes after 2 months of intra-party debates about how to outwardly treat the Trump White House, a process which played out not only in public but also in private meetings and conference halls between leading party operatives, elected officials, and message crafters. I predict the coming divide in the Democratic Party won't be ideological so much as it will be between those who resist and oppose and those who accommodate and appease. Strategist David Brock told roughly 120 donors gathered in Florida over the weekend to plot a path forward. I must say I'm already sort of turned off to the whole notion, given that scene. But okay, these things happen. That mindset has permeated every outpost of the party, from governor's mansions to Congress. Whether it's in state houses or the offices of state attorneys general, the Democratic National Committee, or the constellation of outside left-leaning political groups, Trump's benefit of the doubt is gone. At a forum this week for candidates running to be the next DNC chair, the very idea that the party should try to work with the new president was dismissed as absurd. That's a question that's absolutely ridiculous, said New Hampshire Party Chairman Raymond Buckley when asked whether the Democratic Party should try to work with Trump where it can find opportunities. Television commentator Jamu Green offered, if you saw the millions of people who marched in the streets this weekend and participated in it, they are looking to the Democratic Party. We have an opportunity as a party to be that place of resistance, so we have to form a solid resistance as a party. And no, it is not about working with Donald Trump. Some party leaders are wary of the implications of teeth-baring, no-holds-barred opposition. They worry about the difficult position in which it puts vulnerable Democratic senators. 10 of them will be up for re-election in 2018 in states that Trump carried. There are also concerns about the danger of appearing overly obstructionist and the possible blowback it could create for party office holders up and down the ballot in 2018. An explicitly aggressive approach also stands to shape the 2020 presidential field, incentivizing potential candidates to compete in expressing their level of anti-Trump vitriol. We need to remember that one of the reasons young voters, especially, were uninspired is you can't have a message of, I'm not him, cautioned DNC Vice Chairman R.T. Ryback, former Minneapolis mayor. Focusing too much on what he says, every absurdity, every misrepresentation of every fact, every lie that comes out of his mouth or his tweets makes no sense to me, said former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. There's no R in there. And he's also a candidate for California governor at the moment. The best way, he says, to fight Trump is to chart what represents the values, the priorities that we're for. I don't think it makes sense to spend all of our time responding to every tweet. I think that will just reinforce a notion that many people have in our country that we put party before country. I'm not sure how well that will go. Brock's Florida conference outlined some of the philosophical fault lines. In one closed-door session, Chicago Mayor and former Barack Obama Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel advocated a measured approach to Trump's opposition, one in which Democrats choose only specific fights with a tight game plan. Sitting opposite Emanuel, former Joe Biden Chief of Staff Ron Klain shared his rules for a 100-day fight club, a battle royal he advocated to mark Trump's opening stretch, according to people in the room. Other sessions detailed a massive pushback operation that featured expansive litigation plans and opposition research efforts. 3 days ago, Donald Trump went from being a private citizen who tweets and criticizes to the establishment, said Ted Lieu, a Los Angeles area congressman who has been vocally anti-Trump, to the point of introducing legislation to stop the new president from launching a nuclear first strike without passing it by Congress. He and the Republicans have unified control, and they own it. It is Trump's foreign policy, Trump's economy, Trump's health care plan. So he has to govern. And in less than 2 years, voters will go to the polls and he has to own it. Added Zach Petkanas, director of the DNC's anti-Trump war room. We are very wary that this administration is trying to flood the zone with a whole lot of stuff that is very objectionable all at once and make it very difficult by creating a cacophony of terribleness so that not one thing gets through. It's a tactic that they used on the campaign, and they were fairly successful at doing so. So in a lot of ways, we look at our jobs as focusing in on what we think are the most important objectionable things. The DNC war room is currently taking on Trump's cabinet nominees, ties to Russia, and potential conflicts of interest. Even so, Strident anti-Trump Democrats worry that deal-makers like Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer will try to find agreements with the new president. Concerns that have been highlighted by the cabinet confirmation process in which Schumer has prioritized 8 nominees rather than trying to gum up all the picks at once. In their view, a true opposition party in the Senate should grind all Republican movement to a halt. But that creates a problem for the senators leading the charge, who insist choosing their battles is the most effective way to kneecap Trump's agenda. Opposing every nominee was not seriously on the table. It never has been. That's not a test of whether or not you're resistant, said Hawaii Senator Brian Schatz, noting that the party simply doesn't have the votes to stop many of them. Now, I would pause here and say again that, it depends on how you define the mission, of course. But to me, of prime importance, I would say, is keeping their ability to create policy and legislate their agenda to a minimum would be the most important thing. Affording them the least time and giving them the least ability to actually create policy. Now, some of that will be in the form of stopping as many or delaying as many nominations as possible. But again, those nominations are likely inevitable. But there is the fact that if Trump were to actually fill up his entire administration, you could, in fact, force the nominations process to take the entirety of the 115th Congress to get done. But that doesn't leave any office to which they hold a vote vacant, because you're just not going to be able to defeat a straight party line vote in a 52-48 Senate. You can just make it take a hell of a long time. I am pretty certain that Brian Schatz is dedicated to making the process take as long as possible, but that doesn't mean the same thing as voting no on every single nominee. We'll see how that comes out. Anyway, I just think it presents an interesting contrast, not only in the differing strategies. They got the people who say, we should look for some areas of agreement so that we're not simply attacked as mindless partisans. Maybe. And then you also have the people who say, no, you should be voting no on everything. And why can't the Democrats X, Y, Z? Once again, a bit of a 2 through 9 problem, as Greg described it, I think, quite accurately up at the top of the program. Anyway, time for us to stop here for the day. There's much, much more that we can get to, and we'll get back to those overarching stories of Russia and weirdness and corruption and some fantastical stories, some of which dive into some really interesting tech areas too. That's sort of a good set of Friday stories. Of course, that will all be disrupted by Trump's having said something even more outrageous and stupid by the time we get around to that. And fingers crossed, we can get our minds off of the weirdest and pettiest stuff with a visit from Josie Duffy Rice. We'll see if we can't set that one up to work for tomorrow. In the meantime, what have we skipped for today? Well, I don't say that's the job necessarily of the guys on the after show, but it certainly turns out to be their habit. So, what's up today on the Thank God It's Jovity episode? Donald Trump lavished VIP treatment on foreign business partners during Inauguration Week. Anti-immigration organization VDARE announces a private Yosemite resort denounces a private Yosemite resort for canceling their conference in March. And in the era of Trump, the professor watch list hounding academics for discriminating against conservatives. And
from Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, thanks for listening. What about the last half? They'll be reporting that bad feminist author Roxane Gray severs ties with Simon & Schuster over their book deal with neo-Nazi Breitbart brown shirt Milo Yiannopoulos. And 150 years later, black farmers are still fighting to farm. Stay tuned for all that and more on the After Show next.